It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little well known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters.
"My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?"
Mr. Bennet replied that he had not.
"But it is," returned she, "for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it."
Mr. Bennet made no answer.
"Do you not want to know who has taken it?"
cried his wife impatiently. You wish to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it. This was invitation enough.
"Why, my dear, you must know. Mrs. Long says that Netherfield Park is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England."
What is his name?
"Bingley."
Is he married or single?
"Single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls."
How so? How can it affect them?
"My dear Mr. Bennet, how can you be so tiresome? You must know I am thinking of his marrying one of them."
Is that his design in settling here?
"Design? Nonsense. How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must go and see him as soon as he comes."
I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves. Which may be still better, for as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley may like you the best of the party.
"Why, my dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty."
In such cases, a woman might not often have much beauty to think of.
"But, my dear, you must go and see Mr. Bingley as soon as he comes into the neighborhood."
It is more than I engage for, I assure you.
"But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go merely on that account. For in general, you know they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go. It will be impossible for us to visit if you do not."
You are over-scrupulous, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you. And I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent in his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls.
"Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your children in such a way? You delight in vexing me. You have no compassion on my poor nerves."
You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least.
"Ah, you do not know what I suffer."
But I hope you will get over it and live to see many a young man of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood.
"It will be no use to us if 20 such men should come, for you will not visit them."
Depend upon it, my dear, that when there are 20, I will visit them all. Mr. Bennet was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley. He had always intended to go, though, to the last, always assuring his wife that he should not go. And, until the evening after the visit was paid, she had no knowledge of it. It was then disclosed in the following manner. Observing his second daughter employed in the process of trimming a hat, he suddenly addressed her with, "I hope Mr. Bingley will like it, Lizzie."
"We are not in such a way to know what Mr. Bingley likes,"
said her mother resentfully.
"for we are not to go."
"But you forget, Mamma,"
said Elizabeth.
"that we are to meet him at the assemblies, and that Mrs. Long has promised to introduce him."
"I do not believe Mrs. Long will do any such thing. She's a selfish, hypocritical woman, and she has 2 nieces of her own, and I have no opinion of her."
No more have I, said Mr. Bennet, and I'm glad to find that you do not depend on her saying. Mrs. Bennet deigned not to make any reply, but, unable to contain herself, began scolding one of her daughters.
"Don't keep coughing so, Kitty. For heaven's sake, have some compassion on my nerves. You tear them to pieces."
Kitty has no discretion in her coughs, said her father. She times them ill.
"I do not cough for my own amusement,"
replied Kitty fretfully. When is your next ball to be, Lizzie?
Tomorrow fortnight.
Aye, so it is, cried her mother. And Mrs. Long does not get back to the day before, so it will be impossible for her to introduce him, for she will not know him herself. Then, my dear, you may have the advantage of your friend and introduce Mr. Bingley to her. Impossible, Mr. Bennet, impossible, when I do not know him myself. How can you be so teasing? I honor your circumspection. A fortnight's acquaintance is certainly very little. One cannot know what a man really is by the end of a fortnight. But if we do not venture, somebody else will. And after all, Mrs. Long and her nieces must stand that chance. And therefore, as she will take me in act of kindness, if you decline the office, I will take it on myself. The girls stared at their father. Mrs. Bennet said only, "Nonsense! Nonsense!" What could be the meaning of that emphatic exclamation? Cried he. Do you consider the forms of introduction and the stress that is laid on them as nonsense? I cannot quite agree with you there. But what say you, Mary? For you are a young lady of deep reflection, I know, and read great books and make extracts.
Mary wished to say something very sensible, but knew not how.
While Mary is adjusting her ideas, he continued, let us return to Mr. Bingley.
I'm sick of Mr. Bingley.
Cried his wife. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but why did you not let me know before? If I had known as much this morning, I certainly would not have called on him. It is very unlucky, but as I have actually paid the visit, we cannot escape the acquaintance now. The astonishment of the ladies was just what he wished. That of Mrs. Bennet perhaps surpassing the rest. Though, when the initial tumult of joy was over, she began to declare that it was what she had expected all the while. How good was it in you, my dear Mr. Bennet? But I knew I should persuade you at last. Now, Kitty, you may cough as much as you choose, said Mr. Bennet, and as he spoke, he left the room, fatigued with the raptures of his wife.